think it's time for you to have your lysergic acid. Drink this down and... Mojo Radio. Mojo Radio. We love...
Hello everyone, welcome back to Rec Room Radio. Today I have our guest with us today, Marcel Dumas Gautreau. Really proud to get him on. We have our co-host as well, Hazy Dialects. I think I'm going to be enjoying this episode a lot. He's been a good friend I've known for a hot minute now. And we're going to be talking particularly about his Substacks that he's been writing, Gang Weed Conservatism. Been enjoying reading it, and I think it's a pretty trippy ride, no pun intended. Hazy, want to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Hazy Dialects. I'm the guy who's been on Twitter a lot, discussing at length how someone might be excelling at one field doesn't make them a master at all. Take Elon Musk, for example, who has been talking about the 80% of ventilation and how that is incorrect to understand how, someone's, ability to survive on ventilation, works out, But, Joe Rogan and them on a podcast together, clearly they're experts of how asthmatic symptoms work, and how breathing works all together. So I'm going to push it over to our guest of the day and let him chat a little bit about himself. Since I've read all of his, I read the Substacks, and he's a exceptional writer, and it was quite a read. So I can't wait to get into that. But first, I'll let him introduce himself.
All right, Sola Hazy, thank you for having me on. Happy to be here. My name is Marcel Dumas Gautreau. I am a PhD graduate from George Mason University, an Austrian economist, fellow at the Mises Institute, lots of other libertarian bona fides like that. And this article series, Gang Weed Conservatism, primarily concerns what can only be called a top-down, very artificial push. Really, it's across all spectrums, or rather all strains of right-wing thought, even from the mainstream Republican Party out to the most supposedly niche and edgy of alt-right ideologies. There's this constant drumbeat of poison pushers trying to get people to just try it, just try psychedelics. Whether or not people are actually doing those psychedelics, I don't know, but definitely it is being pushed. And so I think people should be aware of the fact that this isn't normal. It's not a coincidence. It's not something that you should simply wave off. You should be aware of who's doing it, and you should be questioning them vigorously when somebody is trying to push these ideas.
Yeah, as we understand, pharmaceuticals are not a niche topic. It's not a niche subject matter in terms of our understanding in the modern day lexicon, or even in the early 90s to 80s, as PSAs will release on a regular basis about how they scramble your mind. At least I would imagine that the codependency on these things would do so. Thus, it was almost spoken about as a holistic wavering of drugs in any capacity, at least if you're not getting them from a doctor or registered nurse. Throughout this series, a man, Marcel here, has spoken about psychedelics and the transcendence science that is not irrefutable and far from reputable in terms of sources. But surprisingly enough, we've seen people from Russell Brand, who talks about the redistribution of wealth, to high-class conservative figures as Jordan Peterson speak at length about the subject matter on channels like Dave Rubin. With all these individuals from drastically different parameters of the spectrum, if we're speaking politically, as well as people who even talk about the disenfranchisement of Black people who might be seeing it as an apropos decision to take upon psychedelics. Marcel tries to make sense of it all and what might be the motivators as to why people are even feeling involved or encouraged to push these drugs with less than substantiary evidence to even inform the audience to partake in these pills. So I would like to give it up to Sola Requiem, because he's coming in now to put something on the subject matter as well.
Yeah, no, I agreed, and I really enjoyed definitely reading through a series, because it's interesting how you started off with you're reading The American Conservative, and the head piece was Principalities and Powers, and they went into the whole Aaron Rodgers situation with him and the COVID vaccine refusal, and you just go down the rabbit hole to figure out, oh, this guy's actually doing psychedelics too, he's like getting information for like some shaman-esque figure, and it kind of like begs the question when you look at other political figures in there. And even so, like, you're able to bring up, like, you know, Carl Jung and, like, C.S. Lewis on that. Was there anyone else you thought about bringing in for the first article? Charles Taylor and the World of Pure Imagination?
Sorry, be a little more clear when you say, was there anybody else I wanted to bring in?
Yeah, my apologies. So, for necessarily that topic, because I know you touched a lot about, like, the religious, I guess, if you put it, the religious right sides of it, like the Orthodox Christians, and going forward on that, like that whole culture subsect of the right.
No, going through TAC and other parts of the Teal Network did it for the most part. This particular strain of thought only appears in what can only be called more liturgical branches of Christianity, from more, you know, the more high church, we'll say, high church people. So the people who become Ortho, they become Catholic, maybe they become Anglican or Lutheran, although I haven't actually seen any self-declared Lutherans doing this kind of thing, but it's really on that side of the spectrum. I think the only person who was this part one article that ended up not being such was Roosh V. I do not remember on what basis, but I decided that Roosh V belonged in a separate article. Oh, because his story of conversion was so interesting that it belongs somewhere else.
My question that really, I suppose, kind of comes to anyone who sees you go down this rabbit hole with such an intricate level of research, I wanted to ask, what was the initiator for you to get into the subject matter? What thing did you come across, or what idea dawned on you that made you want to go down this rabbit hole?
So I would say I had always thought there was something slightly strange about the Joe Rogan, you should just smoke weed, man, that kind of thing. But I was willing to, let it slide because it's Joe Rogan. That's just its own weird thing. I had known that other people on the right had these strange views. I had named Cernovich. I kind of seen this sort of thing. I had heard the story of Adam Waffen, which I discussed in the very last article. That one got me thinking about MK Ultra. But the thing that pushed it over the basket was the TAC article. Like when I saw an article, but that article in TAC about not Timothy Leary, what is his name? Aaron Rodgers. And I just looked at that, and I was in another discussion with it, and I listened to other people talk about it, and I realized, like, no, this is actually insane. Like, this is actually not something that is normal. And this is something, I mean, Sola has seen me in plenty of Twitter spaces. I'm very much against pretending that abnormal things are normal. So, and I'm very much upset when, I tell people, like, yeah, everybody's pushing it. And then when you say that, and they say, oh, I don't think everybody's pushing it. Like, can you give me examples? And so I decided, okay, I never want to hear anybody ask me these sorts of questions ever again for the rest of my life. So we're going to write a whole article, and anytime anybody asks me or questions me, when I say everybody on the right is pushing psychedelic drugs, they'll say, nah, who? And I start saying Jordan Peterson, Oldbug, Cernovich, Rick Perry. I just start running through name after name after name. So it was a buildup of facts on my mind, the TAC thing, and a discussion surrounding it that I heard on a podcast tipped me over the basket, and it's like, okay, let's write it.
And I think that necessarily one of the fascinating things about the article so I wanted to say that it wouldn't necessarily be compelling to me as a reader to see that there was a large swath of conservatives pushing psychedelics. Like maybe there's just an evangelical subsection of the religiosity within the conservative boundaries that look towards some way of reaching transcendence or reaching the higher up to speak to the word of God or be in touch with it. And I could imagine that. What makes this article particularly unique is the fact that there are so many individuals that reside within different political factions that are so misaligned that you couldn't imagine them all unifying on this one thing. And so it does, especially with them all having drastically different motivators as to why this is a good thing. So that's a very interesting thing I thought was at least worth delving into in your article. When you speak about this subject matter, you go, okay, not only is this people who have drastically different ideologies and beliefs, these are all people who are coming with uniquely uniquely crafted messages that would only it would be different if all these people were saying the exact same thing. Like, okay, there's a unilateral thing, understanding about the undeniable evidence that is surrounding psychedelics, for example, right? Like, if they were all unified, they were all saying the same thing. Yeah, you can understand that. But no, these messages feel more curated to the particular audience, ones that are uniquely different than the ones that are being said, while there are also differences. So I thought it was fascinating in that regard. So
yeah, it's very much like a Dare commercial, or that meme where the guy's trying to offer you weed and it's like, please, bro, you got to smoke this, bro. No, that's indica. This is sativa, bro. It's a different strain, bro. Please. Being on the American right is very much like that, where a bunch of thought leaders are each trying to get you to do a different psychedelic, and each one is offering you a different reason. Like, please, bro, this will clear your nihilism, bro. Please, it'll make you better at coding, dude. Please, I'm begging you. This is different, bro. Please try it.
It's interesting you bring that up too, because you talk more about Charles Taylor and the book Secular Age, and almost this reignition of him using a term called reenchantment, which is a modern term that was coined. And I liked how in the first article you kind of took the bull by the horn, where you just said what Taylor fails to understand is this: all this magic stuff's 100% fake, without a single exception. The people in the past were too stupid, ignorant, deluded, or brainwashed to pick it up. And then you just go down the list showing hey, this is actually a pretty modernist thing. This isn't some ancient guru wisdom from let's say the Eastern Orthodox in the mountains type thing.
Yes, and I should also clarify, Charles Taylor is a perfectly intelligent person, and Charles Taylor is not himself pushing psychedelics on people. Rather, this reenchantment, disenchantment idea is then being used to justify this use of drugs. I mean, I have a problem with Charles Taylor in that he is religious and I am not, but I do not think that he is part of the problem that this article and this article series is meant to discuss.
Okay, sounds good. I'm sure we're going to get it down the road, but a quick question. You see the right, mainly in political streams normally. We went from the Nixon era and then Reagan of a very hard stance against drugs and the war on drugs. When do you think that was a kind of a shift or a change culturally for this?
When did conservatives start pushing psychedelic drugs?
Yeah, when would you say, in I guess the modern term, because I know the CIA, we're going to get to that later in the podcast, was already messing with that stuff. But
I would say it started in earnest sometime around COVID. That really kicked it into gear, because that is when you saw the importation of pharma skepticism, anti-vaccine stuff into the right. And so I think that was the inflection point. I know the first time that I had heard people making the case for these drugs was I forgot to libertarianism in 2012, or maybe a little beforehand, for Ron Paul, and actually maybe it was a little after, sometime in 2009, in the first Obama, the first one of the Obama administration. And a major personality at that time was a guy named Adam Kokesh, who was a member of Iraq Veterans Against the War, fought in Fallujah. He used to, probably still does, do activism with Code Pink, and he was always talking about, I'm trying to remember what his drug of choice was. I do believe that Adam Kokesh was into salvia and psilocybin. And he was always talking about how different psychedelic drugs were critical to preserving his mental state because of all of the various crimes that he admitted that he perpetrated while he was in Fallujah. So that was my first time sort of hearing about drugs in this way. And again, because that was simply Adam Kokesh being weird, and I understood, reasonably well that the libertarian movement is full of those kinds of weirdos, I just buried that, right? It's okay, that's just an interesting thing about Adam Kokesh. A lot of people who are into libertarianism, especially in those days, in the Free State Project and so on, again, that culture has changed a little bit, were into drugs. There was a whole entrapment scandal that went through, well, no names, but the Free State Project and certain radio shows affiliated with it had some things happen, starting with entrapments or just sting operations based on drugs, which is actually probably one of the major reasons, just if nothing else, why you should not do drugs, is that people who do drugs are a danger to any organization that they're in, because they attract the attention of law enforcement. Everybody commits 3 felonies a day, as the saying goes. And so any organization that allows people to do drugs is probably going to attract government attention just for that. If they're already getting government attention, that's an in for infiltration. And the kinds of people who will join an organization with people like you will be inherently people who are not good at assessing risk.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. What would you say about I know in the first article you've written about, correct me if I'm wrong, Sam McCall was his name? And the 3-part series of use of psychedelics as viewed from the right?
Oh yeah, Sam McCall's article in I Am 1776, yes.
What would you say, did that shock you, like reading the results in that? Because I saw you were pretty bold in your response, being like, this is some noble savage stuff, sorry, the human sacrifices will stop type mentality. Do you want to comment or elaborate more on that?
Yes, well, by the time I got to that, I was not surprised. This article was originally written as one giant article at first, but then sometime around breaking like in the tens of thousands of words, a few friends of mine said, Marcel, you have to split this up. And I don't remember what got me to the I Am 776 thing, but no, by that time I was not surprised to read it. I was just annoyed. I think I was directed to it. I think by that point I was looking at Cernovich, and I think Cernovich is what led me to this. Because McCall was the one talking about the proper liturgical frameworks, Christianity as a scuba suit, like you're turning on the Geller field before you go into the warp. Before you go into this demon realm, make sure that you first you get down on your knees, then you say your rosaries, bow your head with great respect,
Yeah, I get that. What would you say, though, to a larger audience? Because I know, for example, the other night, I'm not going to say a person's name, you got an argument with a gentleman who was that religious, psychedelic bro. And he was critiquing, saying, like,
in fairness to that guy, he was not telling you to do psychedelics. So I would say this. One, when you read something, right, this article demonstrates why the person we're talking about, why that person's position is dangerous. Look, barring the facts of it, just temporarily stepping on whether that spirits are real. Saying that these things put you in touch with the spiritual, but you shouldn't do it because it's dangerous, is a total non-starter if you are Christian, because any Christian knows that you have a friend against whom no weapon shall prosper, right? So saying like, oh, be careful because of these spiritual entities. So any Christian would say, well, hang on a second, I'm protected from all hostile spiritual entities, right? And so any person of like moderate curiosity will just ask the question like, well, what if I make sure that I'm properly protected then? Can I do it? And you might be able to get into a dialogue saying like, well, that would be like saying, if I'm strong enough in my faith, can I make human sacrifices to pagan gods? Like, if one is true, you wouldn't do the other. You might be able to, but either way, this is a mode of thought that is even allowed on the table. So just on its own, separate from the truth, you shouldn't say things like this. Second, this stuff's not real, right? None of these things are real. And, people were saying, the very fact that atheists take these drugs, come out of them and think that the delusions they arrived at while they were on drugs are real, and they're taking this as evidence of the divine. And this is, again, I haven't used this argument in many, many years because I've sort of outgrown this phase. But this is like a really insane level of God of the gaps, right? At this point, now you're like, people used to make fun of Bill O'Reilly, oh, tide goes in, tide goes out, can't explain that. But now we're like, yo, when I drink South American tree sap, I see ghosts. Can you explain that, atheist? It almost insults your intelligence to even have to engage in it. And so what I would more deeply tell is that I really don't need to explain why you shouldn't take psychedelic drugs to get in touch with God or ghosts or anything like that. Everybody just living in our liberal Western society should understand, in theory, why that's wrong. And on a more important meta level, anybody who tells you otherwise should be mistrusted. Anybody who tells you otherwise, you should be immediately suspicious of them. Everything they say is immediately called into question, and that's another issue. Not only should you do it, but most people who are not you, right? People who are not in whatever local right-wing network you're in, just normal people will, you already have, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably already have enough weird-sounding right-wing views that are off-putting to people. It will not help you at all to tell people that you arrive at some of these conclusions by microdosing LSD, right? That cannot possibly help you. You are only burning credibility. And, you're putting yourself in like a private world of just total nonsense, right? When you do these drugs, the reality is you're putting yourself in a private world of total nonsense. Even if somehow you allow yourself to be convinced that that's not true, everybody else will think that that is true. And that should be a strong, strong reason for you to think twice and then 3 times again before you let somebody like put it in your head that your life will be improved by doing drugs.
I'm actually kind of curious because I know the first article was tailored specifically, you said, like, to the religious rights, to the Roman Catholics, and to the Eastern Orthodox. Did you ever dive pretty deep into, like, the whole Christian mysticism, that whole thing? Because I know the Eastern Orthodox, they have a strange practice where they have the foot of a saint that somehow is preserved, and they put it in a large body of water, like a giant tub, and then they put some type of ingredients in it. I don't know. I'm not going to say what it is. You can use your imagination. And they get the townspeople to come by and like drink out of it if there's like decayed foot in there, basically. And they talk about, we see like spiritual visions, we see angels and all these crazy things like that. Like, but it gets really deep into like the lore of like Christian mysticism. What's your thoughts on that?
I can't say. I mean, I'll just let that go. You know, if that's what you're doing, you know, at least you're supervised, you know. And I can safely say that that is completely separate from the kind of thing I'm complaining about. I mean, you know, in the nature of good taste and good relations, I'll just let that, we'll just step over it.
Okay, no, I completely understand.
In my personal opinion about psychedelics, I can see how, at best, what people typically experience is a certain ego death, a certain detachment from oneself, and they get to almost reconfigure to some degree, realizing how insignificant they are in the world in some regard. Thus, like, they get to recenter how much what ought and what ought not matter to them in life. And I think that is at best what could be discerned from psychedelics to some degree. However, if you're trying to tell the masses at large that a constant dosage of a drug that almost detaches you from yourself is a is a way to reconfigure like your living and how you live and how you perceive the world, is to constantly almost unplug yourself to some regard from life and how like existence occurs. I don't know if that is tenable in any capacity. So that was my at least in terms of like a lot of people I've listened to, and it almost seems incoherent to present this as like a constant that should be a part of your life. If we're talking psychedelics, mushroom consumption, and microdosing.
I do want to make one more point on mystical experiences, and then I think we should move on to the next article. So for those who don't know, mystical experiences is this idea, actually let me just read the exact definition from Rudolf Otto, quote, "The feeling of it may at times come sweeping like a gentle tide, pervading the mind with a tranquil mood of deepest worship. It may pass over into a more set and lasting attitude of the soul, continuing, as it were, thrillingly vibrant and resonant, until at last it dies away and the soul resumes its profane, non-religious mood of everyday experience." And I compare this to a feeling that I get, you know, on those occasions, maybe once or twice a year when I enter a church, and, you know, you sort of feel the weight of the building on you. You know, you look at the artifacts and you kind of feel this, well, I feel this temptation to touch things almost like a small child. And as I'm about to do it, like I sort of feel this force almost beyond social propriety, like almost something else telling me like, you know, don't do that. And then I sort of take a deep breath and then the feeling goes away. And this idea of mystical experiences, and I contrasted it heavily with something more acceptable. I contrast this to Paul. So if somebody were to tell me, again, I am an atheist, but if I'm talking to somebody and they say, I believe in the risen Christ, and I say, okay, why do you believe in the risen Christ? And they say, well, you're not going to believe it. But you're right. Yeah. I was walking down the street on my way to Damascus to go oppress some Christians, and the risen Christ appeared before me in the street, and he blinded me, lectured me for a moment, and then he told me where to go and who I would meet. Nobody else saw that person but me. And then when I was in the city, sure enough, a person cured my blindness, and also now I can perform miracles. I would say, okay, you know, I can't just say like, well, you know, it's the chemicals in your brain, right? That's a bit of a weird thing to say, like, oh, well, you know, ever heard of oxytocin? There you go, right? That'd be kind of dumb. That'd be a dumb response. However, if you tell me, well, I have this feeling, it was transient, that is to say, it came as soon as it went. It was passive. I wasn't able to trigger it. It was ineffable. I can't explain it. And it was noetic. That is to say, I feel as though I learned something. I would say, okay, well, that's not anything, right? That's a feeling in your brain. And what is particularly egregious with these people is, one person we were talking to talked about like the God molecule. They were able to isolate down to a specific molecule what caused that feeling. I mean, at a certain point, we can probably explain that feeling more easily. We can explain love or even hunger, I'm pretty sure. That is like the most explainable. And I compared it to somebody, the more vague and indescribable the feeling is, the more likely it is to be a dump of chemicals in your brain. And I compared it before to like Scarecrow's fear gas. Like imagine you met somebody who had never experienced they never experienced fear before. They experienced anger, sadness, but never fear. And then Dr. Crane comes along and, hits them with the fear gas. And suddenly they're hit with a feeling that they've never felt before. They can't explain it. And they say, I think this is like supernatural. I've never felt this emotion before and I can't even describe it. It's wrong to compare what I'm feeling right now to anger. Like, yes, my heart is pounding, but it's different. And I would say, okay, that's called fear. Like, it's just chemicals. Like, no, this was way too complicated to be a chemical. And I say, yeah, watch, here's and I just spray you again, right? And you're like, like, okay, so if I've got it down to the specific molecule that it is, if I'm telling you, here's the molecule that causes it, here is the gas that I can put on you that causes it, and each time I do it, basically without fail, you feel it. That is obviously, like, you cannot possibly say that is any kind of evidence for supernaturalism. We've literally identified the molecule. But often people do say, well, can you identify the specific chemical pathway? I guess not, but we don't need to, right? We know what certain things are even before we've identified them. We knew about heredity before we knew about DNA.
Yeah, I think any belief that requires at least a strong adherence to a belief that its strongest rebuttal to dissenting opinions happens to rely on the notion of the inexplainable, or just asking or inquiring ad infinitum is completely kind of useless as a foundation for like a belief system, or like that is probably like the worst of it all. If I can like explain extensively for the most part what we're referring to or we're discussing, and all you can do is just ad infinitum ask me a question or inquire until I say I don't know, and then go. We're back at the Bill O'Reilly sort of conundrum of you can't explain that. For the audience at home, if you could, for the first article before we go into the next article, just give an overarching message that should be understood by it.
You're not going to cure your nihilism or restore your family or your nation by taking drugs. You're going to have to do something else, right? I think I said, I'm sorry, Aaron, but you're still in Egypt. Imagine if Aaron and Moses just said, like, we need to remystify the world by getting high, and then somehow this will lead to us, curing the Hebrews of whatever malaise they have. Like, no, that's not how that works.
Sounds good. Moving on to the second article then that you wrote, Peter Thiel and the Narco-Capitalist. And this one was pretty good because you actually tackled a lot of things like, hey, where is a lot of this new stuff coming from? You talked about, Ebola. You talked about Steve Bannon, Andrew Anglin, Greg Abbott as like some of the people like pointing to like, hey, why is the American right so interested in this phenomenon? And I feel like Ebola, especially if you ever go online and like go into these circles where they're more like, the esoteric right people, the people like the Nietzscheans, if you will, like that whole crowd where they're rejecting that. They're like, yeah, we're like, Ebola and Nietzsche. But same question, similar before. Do you think there's anyone else you would add on to that list from like philosopher standpoints?
Of old like Wholesome Chungus, old like I'm not a fascist, I'm a super fascist. I'm not a fascist, I'm a whatever. No, I think I named most of I got that list because part of it when I was doing this research, I found that there are plenty of articles like in The Guardian and other normal or left-wing sources that also think that this is strange, and that's like the ultimate confirmation that you're onto something. It's like, why is the American right so interested in psychedelic drugs? Like, I'm glad somebody else noticed. Yeah,
definitely. And you were talking too about MDMA and America's victims of racism, police violence, and mass incarceration.
Oh,
and
yes. The left's concern is that Peter Thiel is normalizing drugs in like a race or in like an evil racist capitalist way. And it's like, no, we need to be giving more drugs to like minorities to help them cope with America's racism. Yeah, could you imagine just totally missing the point? And also imagine, I seem to remember, many years ago, there was a case of an urbanized individual who like eaten somebody's face off because he was high on bath salts, and like no matter how like he had to get shot like well over a dozen times before he eventually went down. We should not be giving out drugs like this, and they treat it like a human right.
It's one of those things where it's just like, oh my gosh. I remember reading that, drinking coffee, and I was laughing to myself like a little chuckle at that line. But Hazy, you're gonna say something?
Also, I think it's kind of like quite perplexing that if we're talking about the disenfranchisement of the Black community at large, and in terms of a capitalist regime that is disenfranchising them and subjugating them in such a way, why would you wouldn't you want to make that community, if anything, more proactive? Prescribing to this notion, it feels like, if above all else, I would want to enact some communal effort to ensure that we are uplifting this community through any means we can, whether that be through charity, an assertion of like more communal wealth, things that build up the community in ways of like making more like businesses that are desirable within the local areas, something of that nature, not encouraging a continuous sedation of that community. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And this is something also that, and I talk about, like, the left just doesn't get it when it comes to these things. A lot of effort was saved for me because a lot of leftists had done there's a lot of other research by other people, but a lot of left-wing sources did research on this, and I could just look at them and was like, wow, this is incredible stuff. And I would just see them take all this information together and just jump into crazy town. Just get the absolute wrong conclusions out of this. Like, this must be because Peter Thiel wants to strengthen the patriarchy. It's like, wait, what? No. Or as you say, like, Peter Thiel is trying to give this to, or not Peter Thiel in this case, the Mercer Foundation is trying to give these drugs to veterans to like take the edges off their PTSD. And you're thinking like, that's terrible. You should be doing that to Black people instead. They're traumatized, aren't they? It's one of those things where it's like, think about everything. You're literally seeing people who, by your own understanding, are some of the most vile scum imaginable doing this to make money. And you're like, why not make money off of me instead?
And it's funny you mention that too, because recently, for me getting out of the armed service, I've seen a lot of up push and the VA and other third-party agencies saying like, hey, we're doing these new experimental, operations of like, microdosing. Sign up today if you want to try this out. It's definitely going to cure your PTSD. And if you look at the research on it, it's like extra shady stuff that like doesn't really have any proven statistical use to the sense. It's just like, oh, we done a study on 10 people and 3 of them they said they felt better when high. I'm like, yeah, because they're fucking high. Excuse my language, they're high. Like, what'd you expect? But it's interesting.
Yeah, we'll get to, before we start talking about the troops. So when it comes to understanding, the idea of a Thiel right, so this would be NRX people, intellectual dark web people. So NRX would be people like Bronze Age Mindset, or Bronze Age Pervert rather, Nick Land, Yarvin, Yoram Hazony, and everybody at the National Conservatism Conference. The intellectual dark web, those are the post-left people. So that's Dave Rubin, Brett and Eric Weinstein, Jordan Peterson, Douglas Murray, Joe Rogan, Sam Harris. A lot of these people are, let's say, members of the atheist community. Sam Harris, Steven Pinker, and so on. These were old secularists, secular humanists. And so there's a huge amount of overlap between these people. It was like, yeah, I used to be super far to the left, but then the left left me. They moved too far to the right, to the left. This is also just the calling card of neoconservatism, which is a whole separate topic for a whole separate presentation. I would highly recommend anybody who wants to learn about neoconservatism read Reclaiming the American Right by Justin Raimondo. But this idea of taking people who used to be, bitter enemies of religion, bitter enemies of white America, bitter enemies of tradition, and saying you're going to be a right-wing thought leader now. We've done this dance at least 3 times.
Yeah, and could you elaborate more on what you meant by talking when you're on Peter Thiel, saying that as like Thiel is a primarily known online as a major patron of what is best called the Thiel right? Or how long has that been around, would you say, and like what are the main differentiations between them and like let's say the intellectual dark web or dark enlightenment?
Yeah, so the Thiel right is IDW and Dark Enlightenment. Those are the two, I would say, main branches, the two main sides of the project. When did the Thiel right start being a thing? I would say, so Yarvin was doing Yarvin was doing unqualified reservations for years. I would probably say whatever point Mencius Moldbug came out by name as Curtis Yarvin, that would have been part of it. I know the intellectual dark web started in a certain sense with Jordan Peterson, and Jordan Peterson was a thing during the election of 2016 and a little bit before then. So yes, that would have been, I would say this project really began to siphon off the energy of the MAGA movement.
And do you find it strange at all how like all these different like ideologies, like even talk about it, you terminally online right-wing ideologies, like the monarchist, the Catholic integralist, you know, post-liberalist, the paleos, all these different groups of libertarians are kind of like coming together in the same thing. Did that like raise eyebrows to you? Like, wait a minute, it's like a zoom out moment.
Yes, and there's a few things going on there. One of them is just the fact that, you know, once you know, one radical ideology in a certain sense is just as good as any other if it's just an exercise in self-aggrandizement, right? You always want to be, you're in sort of an arms race. You want to have the hottest take. You want to be, you know, smarter. You want to have something else. But there are very clear, you know, fence lines, certain ideologies you definitely can't jump to. And you might think, well, libertarianism probably won't off-ramp you into many of those, but, you know, no, surprisingly, it will. And so, you know, that's why you see, you know, there are only so many libertarian adjacent ideologies, you know, that are fake like this. I think what they toss out for us, I guess, neo-cameralism, which is Moldbug's idea of this privatized state corporation monarchy thing. That's like an off-ramp for libertarianism. We've also had like post-libertarians or praxians, but that's really, hey, we get to use a word from earlier. That's really like Tradcaths doing an interesting hermeneutic on Murray Rothbard, where they start talking about the marginal value of power. But most of these fake ideologies are really there to stop people from getting into, just say, for example, fascism, right? Just hardline, pure on, like white pride, worldwide fascism. And so most of these ideologies are there to be like, wait, don't do that. You know, picking some wholesome Chungus dictator from Central Europe, it's like, hey, you know who's really based? You know, Codreanu, you know, he ran the Iron Guard in Romania. You know, he was a traditionalist Catholic. That's based, isn't it? You know, hey, you know who's really based? You know, Francisco Franco. But what, you know, but then they'll wink, nudge, nudge, and be like Protestant Franco, right? Which is like, you know, you can have Hitler, but don't call him Hitler, call him Protestant Franco, even though Hitler was also Catholic and not Protestant, so it wouldn't make any sense. You know, it's a very kind of weird kind of dog whistle. And so most of these ideologies are put out there, you know, because I don't know if they just lack the confidence. You know, as an anarcho-libertarian, I'm perfectly capable of arguing against like National Socialism on my own. I don't need to like make up a fake ideology that does nothing. And like anytime somebody's like, you know, Marcel, I disagree with you about anarcho-libertarianism. I think that we should have a state that, you know, attacks bankers and takes their stuff. I don't feel the need to lie and say like, whoa, if you're going to do that, you know, let me waste your time with a whole lot of, you know, a whole lot of esoteric nonsense. Have you heard of Julius Evola? And, you know, that's what a lot of this is, like a bad faith attempt to divert what they feel is like a libertarian to alt-right pipeline.
Thank you. Two things. In some degree, when we talk about dark web enlightenment or like dark web intellectuals, usually these are perceived as some sort of countermeasure or countercultural measure to a lot of society. And it, to some degree, I think a lot of people resonate with these ideas because we feel as though they're inspiring into individualism in them. But in some degree, some of them like go astray and fall into more like dictatorial like ideals, or they start to admire more dictatorial figures to some degree. So I find that kind of interesting as well. some of the conversations, at least one of the things I find to be concerning about one of the dark web intellectuals like Jordan Peterson, who can speak for his own to some degree, but sometimes I think it's one of my minor criticisms of Jordan Peterson is that he's an excellent psychologist. I mean, in terms of his field of understanding that, I think he's pretty amazing. But then there are some takes where I'm not quite sure how he's then baffled by the results of them, such as his like claims about IQ and like how salvageable those people are on society on a larger scale, like their ability to contribute significantly or positively, while also believing that they are operating at a functional negative for society. And then you have people who will respond to something to the effect of, well, we need to get like I don't know how you don't at least implicitly inspire some eugenics rhetoric within your audience, and then you go, what are these people coming from? Like, I mean, it seems like, sorry for the joke here, but I just thought it was just, it's not a joke per se, it's just that it just perplexes me to some regard when there is a clear implicit element to your language that could lead people to more radical or extreme like thought, schools of thought. But I want to ask you about, you said anarcho-libertarianism. Is that what you said? Or is that your prescription, if I'm correct?
Of myself, yes. I'm a Rothbardian, a libertarian,
Okay.
Free markets, anarchism. I'm for all that. I'm still stuck, as some might say, in 2012. You know.
Okay, and for the audience at home, could you just give like a condensed and concise version as to what that includes?
Okay, so anarcho-libertarianism, anarcho-capitalism is just the idea that, you know, the free market is a primary engine of growth, and the state is a parasite on growth. This it gives privileges to destroyers. It causes financial crises through central banking inherently, and so the world would be best served if all states were simply abolished and everything was done in the private sector. That would include cops, courts, and national defense through a combination of, let's say, mercenaries and private courts. Anybody who's interested in that can go on YouTube and look up The Machinery of Freedom, an animated lecture, where David Friedman, a decently good economist for Chicagoan, discusses how, at the base level, how such a social order would work. So I might as well toss out some more books. If you're interested in Austrian economics, you should start out by reading The Mystery of Banking. So watch The Machinery of Freedom animated lecture, read The Mystery of Banking, and then to get into Rothbardianism, the specific sub-branch, go on to Mises.org and look at everything that's there. That's, you know, the flagship of this whole operation. And also, there's a book called Egalitarianism as a Revolt Against Nature and Other Essays. And that book is free to read on Mises.org.
Okay, and so ideally, for a society or for an libertarian or capitalistic anarcho society to work, there doesn't need to be some level of unifying morality or governance per se.
Correct. You can have a great deal of diversity of thought, especially if people don't really live next to each other. You know, since the interface between them will be a pre-arranged court system in case a dispute arises.
And
if there are more foundational disputes, for example, on the nature of even who can make a contract, yeah, we're wandering far afield.
Okay, just wanted to give like an understanding of your framework for the audience at large before we delve into the other topics. You know, we have people of all walks of life come to the podcast, so I thought it was worthwhile just to have the audience be a little bit more informed about the person who is talking about these subject matters at large. But we're currently speaking about your second article, and if you can just walk us through more of what it is emphasizing as a bigger problem as we go along with this thread that you're tying all together for us.
Yeah. So in the case of Peter Thiel, his motive, you know, if it were just Thiel, then his apparent most obvious motive would stand on its own. He has a lot of investments in companies like Atai Life Sciences. There are a few others whose names have escaped me, but if it were just that, then it would be, I don't want to say okay, but it would be normal that people like Dave Rubin, Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris were the three that I thought of off the top of my head, that they were pushing these ideas, right? You're pulling people in, it's like, hey, what do you think of this? Or even if he's just saying like, hey, you welcome to my network, here's a bunch of reading, right? This is your first time, joining whatever organization I have, here's a bunch of things, they just put it in the company Slack channel and everybody reads it. And, everybody goes along with it, and you have some misgivings, but you keep your mouth shut, right? And then next time it's quoted, like Ben Shapiro, right? When Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin are just exchanging words with each other about how great psychedelics are, Ben Shapiro just keeps his mouth shut, right? He just like, okay, well, I guess this is what we're doing now. You know how famously weak-willed and willing to go with the flow Ben Shapiro is. Sometimes people just say things he disagrees with, and he just keeps his mouth shut. He's like, well, if that's how you feel, who am I to disagree?
Could you elaborate further on? You saw on your article, Jordan Peterson posted something that I thought was pretty crazy of a claim, where he tried to say that, was it roughly 85% of people who done psilocybin experiments, they like quit smoking, and then he also said like cancer victims stop fearing death.
Yes, cancer victims stop fearing death, and then he asked, oh, so you're just going to lay that out as being delusional? And then he says there's an 85% success rate in quitting smoking after one psilocybin experience. And then he says 3 MDMA treatments are enough to cure 72% of PTSD patients, but they have to have the mystical experience, and no one knows how to account for that.
Yeah, that's kind of a weird claim he made too. And then he also posted an image saying like psychedelic drugs push the brain to a state never seen before. It's a picture of like the brain all blown up and stuff like that. Do you want to comment at that as well?
Well, I think the most interesting thing about that is Jordan Peterson was he was doing this, but even before, right? It's not like Peter Thiel gave him a check and say, hey, start talking about drugs. There's a whole thing in the psychiatrist community, apparently, or in the psychiatry PhD community, where it's like passed down from master to student, like the Dark Lord of the Sith, where each master inducts his graduate student into the world of psychedelic drugs. And I'm Jordan Peterson. So he was doing this in April of 2017. And so, yeah, definitely it must have been in November of 2016 that it was in the fall semester of 2016 that Jordan Peterson went against University of Toronto's gender pronoun policy. And then it was in the spring semester that people were looking at his videos, his recorded lectures, and so on. And so it was in April of 2017. So in the spring semester, Donald Trump had just become president. That, putting the timeline right, that was when Jordan Peterson really started to get big, and even at that time he was doing drug stuff.
Okay, is there any other further points or anything you want to wrap up for your article for your Parts 2 series while we move on to the next one?
Compass Pathways, that was the other company. Atai Life Sciences and Compass Pathways. But otherwise, yeah, that's it. We can keep going.
All right, thank you very much. Your third article in the 6-part series, Rebecca Mercer and the Pharmacological Warfare. You were talking about that one that I thought was cool, where you're basically attacking more the pharmaceutical angle of like what's going on for that. And you're talking about even like Dan Crenshaw and AOC and people of that were in the ring. You want to like elaborate like an opening for us about what that all is about?
Yeah, so this is the most normal, right? And actually, I want to point this out. When I was bringing this article up to people, very often they would ask me, like, so are you asserting there's some kind of like nefarious conspiracy here? And at first I kind of ran from this and I say, no, there's like a financial incentive, blah, blah, blah. But I was like, hang on a second. If a bunch of people are getting together and like lying about the benefits of potentially harmful drugs in order to like make money from the government, I mean, what is that if not a nefarious conspiracy, right? I mean, people talk about like the tobacco companies or, tobacco companies getting together to lie about tobacco being healthy, or they talk about, this deranged idea that like, what is it, all the car companies shut down the San Francisco streetcar system. I mean, that is a nefarious conspiracy, even though it's not about like, mind control. God, could you imagine a mind control project? So by that logic, yes, what we are talking about is a nefarious conspiracy. And the only question is like, is the motive just, the love of filthy lucre, or is it, something like a thought control project? And so since Peter Thiel has, direct investments in the company, he's like, okay, so maybe he's just in it for the money. And in the case of like Rick Perry, he's definitely just in it for the money. There are a lot of Republican politicians. There's Republican donors like the Mercer Foundation who are donating huge money to get as you were saying earlier, Sola, to get the VA to prescribe these psychedelic drugs to the troops to cure their PTSD. Yeah, this on its own is like a story that could have just been published by anyone. Dan Crenshaw, Rick Perry. Who else did I say?
You said Marcus Luttrell as well.
Marcus Luttrell, yes. Rand Paul, honestly. And actually, Rand Paul's veteran liaison during his campaign for president in 2016, his veteran liaison works for the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And there's other like veteran-led organizations. Marine Lieutenant General Martin Steele. I really do love that name. Navy SEAL Marcus Capone. Yeah, none of these people have real names. Marcus Capone and Martin Steele, and there's one other. All these guys have they have veterans exploring treatment solutions. There's reason for hope, and and a lot of this ties into not right to try, right? Yeah, right to try stuff about getting or it hooks onto right to try. But keep in mind, right to try in its original conception, as libertarians were originally talking about it, was like you have people that have like terminal cancer or something, and there is some drug that might, maybe it has like a 40% chance of, easing your cancer. And they say, well, that's not even 50-50. And it's like, well, 40% is better than 100% chance. So let me try it, right? It's like, well, just have FDA approval. It's like, FDA approval, yeah, we wouldn't want me to die of the cancer that I had, right? But right to try was never about like, oh, I have cancer, and I think that ayahuasca will make me feel better about the fact that I'll stop fearing death. I have the right to try that. I mean, fine, I'll be willing to say maybe you do have the right to try that as like a free thing individual or whatever, but that's not what right to try is, right? It's a hijacking of that original talking point into now this idea of we need to get people who they're having these traumatic nightmares whenever they hear fireworks or whatever. So we need to be giving them psychedelics. Very different.
And really quick, do you want to elaborate more on Red Cell, the company, and Grant Verstanding? Because you wrote about that for the NSA, and he's one of the co-founders of TerraMind and a lot of stuff like that. You want to get more to that?
Yeah, so TerraMind is a company that I'll just read their description. They want to feed healthcare data, including from VETS' Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions, from VETS' past work into artificial intelligence programs to match veterans with psychedelic substances and clinics. And a major backer of TerraMind is Red Cell Partners. And if you look at the board of Red Cell, I really just went through just one after the other. I mean, it's very normal, in a sense, Iron Triangle stuff. We have a former CEO of Northrop Grumman. We have former Defense Secretary, who was a John McCain Distinguished Fellow. We have a former Vice Chairman of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve. We have someone who's on the Board of Directors of the CIA Officers Memorial Foundation and the RAND Corporation. The RAND Corporation, don't get it twisted, is not a company. It is a think tank for the Defense Department. Then the lead independent director is the CEO of Aetna. Aetna is another big pharma company. So you have a venture capital fund, which is also where one of the chief investment officer of a venture capital fund is also the CEO of a pharmaceutical company. I mean, it's the private sector, that's allowed, but that's worth noting. And then their president was acting director of cost assessment and program evaluation in the Department of Defense. So the whole company of Red Cell Partners is just in bed with the Defense Department. And, there are plenty of companies that are in bed with the Defense Department. It makes sense, or at least it is a normal feature of American life, that if you were to look at the board of directors of Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, so on, I mean, we've all seen what is that thing we saw, like Why We Fight? I think all of us at this point, at the age of, in our 20s, have seen this old clip talking about the military-industrial complex. We all know about this. We take this as normal. The stranger thing, then, is the fact that the same kinds of people who you would think would be retiring to get into selling bombs are also retiring from being generals to get into, matching veterans with psychedelic clinics.
No, it's definitely for me too. This article, I'd want to say thank you for it because it kind of hit pretty close for home for like the situation I'm going through currently. But
and I just want to emphasize again, because in the case of these organizations, the shape of the scam is the same, which is we want the DoD to buy our product. Then that is, in a certain sense, normal. This is like a self-contained conspiracy. You know what I'm saying?
it kind of reminds me of The Boys. Have you ever seen that show of like Vought International?
Sure, of course. Yes.
Trying to like get soups into the like DoD.
We think we're a superhero company. We are not. We're a pharmaceutical company. You are our mascot.
Hazy, do you have anything you want to comment on this article or anything you want to bring up as well? Your own questions and reading?
No, this is actually the section that I thought was fine as is. I think in terms of just critical thinking, I really do like Marcel's way of engaging with it in terms of not just looking at a connection and therefore, i.e., accusing it as being bad. Rather, he looks towards like what is it in service of, and then critiques it off of that nature, rather than saying connections to the government, i.e., evil. So I appreciate that we've gone past the first layer of like engaging with connections and how they operate. Also, I sincerely do appreciate the amount of citations that are brought about by this piece alone. Like the amount of hyperlinks is greatly appreciated, and I really shows the extensive level of research you did to this piece. So if you want to move to the third piece and just express the overarching message of the article at large, I'm willing to do that.
Touch a little bit more on MK Ultra though. Would that be okay, Marcel?
Just want to jump straight to that. We accept the Elon Musk article.
You mentioned MK Ultra in the third article as well, didn't you?
Oh yes, Grant Verstandig. Yes, that was just coming attractions. Yes, let me find it.
Yeah, apologies about that. I'm still in the third article going through it right now.
Oh, by all means. So Grant Verstandig, who is the CEO of Red Cell, he talks about MK Ultra as part of an interview. I believe it was with The Guardian. Let me make sure. It was a Bloomberg article. Yeah, it was with Bloomberg. And he says, it doesn't say what prompted him in the interview to say this, because at the bottom of the article it simply says, quote of the day, and it quotes Grant Verstandig, and he says, MK Ultra was one of the darkest times in the history of the Central Intelligence Agency. Coming at you with drugs to see what can be used for espionage or blackmail. This is the opposite. This is special ops soldiers who have come home with invisible wounds. We've partnered to produce life-changing therapies for them. I mean, thanks for that, Grant. Thanks for letting me know. But I think the most MK Ultra will have to come when we get to it. We're at the halfway point.
A little bit in your article. I love that part.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thanks, Grant. Yeah, that was interesting.
Thanks, Grant. I wasn't thinking about it until you said it, but okay.
It's like, oh my god, why he said that?
It's like the Bart Simpson, like what an odd thing to say.
But
again, I'm actually not going to accuse Grant Verstandig of doing mind control stuff. I think Grant Verstandig is in it for the money. Although, let me make sure I have it right. Lou Becky, who was Rand Paul's veteran liaison and works as a lobbyist for MAPS, a multidisciplinary association for psychedelic studies. Or at least that firm, that is thought control. MAPS is not in it for the money. There is an ideological agenda here. And I want to make sure nobody misunderstands me. I mean thought control both in the sense that MAPS has an ideological and not monetary agenda, and also MAPS does research on mind control.
Would there be any last closing comments for your third article or anything you want to bring up to bring us home with that while we go over to the next one about Elon Musk?
No, I think that'll be that.
All right, sounds good. So, Elon Musk grass toucher. That has been a funny thing, especially considering how he took over Twitter and now changed it to X, and the influence he put through, and him bringing up the pseudo people like Russell Brand and all the stuff like that. And what particular, to me, I felt like this article out of all of yours stood out a little bit more different. What prompted you to write this particular part of it?
This one, the reason this was, because RFK Jr., right? RFK Jr. was making the rounds as, maybe a little less so now, but a lot of like right wingers were getting into RFK Jr. and he was like, Elon Musk supporter. I could do a whole thing on RFK Jr. and like who his major donors are and things like that. But he was part of this nexus, this network. And actually, let me just see.
Yeah, then you go further of Tim Pool and Pod Saves America and a lot of these guys.
He was making the rounds on these podcasts. Because I just remember I had at one point remarked how RFK Jr. was only promoted by like DeSantis donors to siphon votes, like schizo votes away from Donald Trump. If I didn't write about it in this article, I must have made a Twitter post about it. And in the course of this, I saw RFK doing, again, pharma skepticism, anti-COVID stuff, and psychedelic stuff, and with all like these same few podcasts and being promoted by Elon Musk. So that was what brought this in, right? You have, in this case, it's not like, the left went too far, let me be a right-wing thought leader. It's more like, I'm a left-winger, but I'm also insane, let me be a right-winger.
Yeah,
both sides.
Yeah, one of the things I found to be kind of interesting about Joe Rogan and Elon Musk is that I do believe being these sort of countercultural icons to some degree, let it not be mistaken. Like he was like one of the most popular individuals that was like not really mainstream to like collaborate with people like PewDiePie or like Joe Rogan's, like smoking with Joe Rogan on the podcast. These individuals have like cultivated themselves as like anti like mainstream to some degree, while also being one of the biggest figures in mainstream populist like conscience. With that comes this narrative of like unprecedented knowledge about certain subject matters. I do believe two things. One of the things I thought was kind of interesting is that I've been kind of berating the talking of ventilation systems and how he didn't understand how those work. But due to his expertise in other fields, people just give him this unfeathered and unpenetratable expertise of all things that exist. Even on a Twitter space in which he was discussing reconfiguring X, the Twitter app, and trying to figure out how that worked, simple questions resulted in him calling people assholes because he just didn't know what he was talking about.
RFK was doing this, or Elon Musk was doing this?
Elon Musk was doing this. My apologies. Elon Musk was talking about basically trying to work with the frame of Twitter's machinery and having to revamp the entire system from ground up. And questions about how or why would you even need to do that resulted in him calling people assholes. So I just think it's important for people to know that people of exceptional heights within success or ascertaining social media platforms are limited in their expertise in every facet or every confine in life, but they are also seen as experts. And to condense this down, because I understand the brevity of the time, I thought it was important to bring these sort of individuals up who do also market psychedelics as well, but the word is taken as gospel due to this cultish fan base and how emphatic their audience is about their presence on online media and how it sometimes brings legitimacy to what they say. So
that's similar to Bronze Age's pervert in a way, how he's becoming a new icon of the right, basically to non-religious one. Yeah,
I would say the six heads of this hydra, as far as fake dissident podcasts are Lex Friedman, Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, Pod Save America, Tim Pool, and Russell Brand. All six of these people, they have the same, like they interview the same people, right? All their guests are basically the same, even though they're supposedly ideologically different. A podcast is just as informed by the guest as the host. And so if you're all interviewing the same people, you're basically pushing them the same ideological agenda. We already see that others who I listed, Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, are directly affiliated with intellectual dark web. So I'm pretty sure, so for that matter, is Tim Pool. Tim Pool's a regular attendee of like a variety of libertarian events I've been to. Russell Brand is his own, maybe, so to speak, his own thing. Pod Save America, and then Lex Friedman is just Lex Friedman. So three of them are known associates of like the Teal Network, like known sort of members of it. Brand, Pod Save America, and Lex Friedman maybe less so. But I mean, Lex Friedman's inclinations are just blatantly clear just by watching a show. And Russell Brand, again, Russell Brand is sort of in a certain way this unpredictable figure. He's like, oh, I have this quirky personality, I just want socialism. But if you're interviewing the exact same guests, citing the exact same research, making the exact same points, then how different are you really? Right? So what these people do is, they allow people to listen to these thoughts and they're like, wow, I am like really threatening the establishment with my heterodox thoughts. But you have like, it's like you're at it's like a store brand cereal. It's like something deeper. It's like, yeah, it's not even bootleg versions. I'm trying to think of like a good metaphor for this. Of like,
like drinking Diet Coke, while simultaneously believing you're having such a revolution in drinking this alternative Diet Coke. You're taking life by the wheels, but it's like it's still Coke at the end of the day.
Or even something different. It'd be more okay. Like imagine so you had a company that produces like say a cereal, and they sell it in a certain box when they sell it at Walmart, but then they sell it in a different box when they sell it at Trader Joe's. But you open up the bag and it's the exact same cereal with the exact same nutrition facts. But like at Trader Joe's, they just emphasize. At Trader Joe's, they emphasize how healthy it is, but at Walmart, they actually intentionally make it look generic and cheap so that you think that it is less expensive than it is because they want you to think like, I am saving money relative to, the name brand thing, but actually you are buying the name brand. Guys,
yeah, kind of similar to like Dave Rubin, where he has like every other guest on, and he just says like, I agree with that for every guest. Like he had a guest on, he had a guest on, he was like, yeah, I want to fully abolish like homosexual marriage and the legitimacy of them.
He's like, I agree with that.
No, he's like, I agree with that. He shook his head. I'm like, bro, you're a gay man. Just got married.
Wait a minute. Yeah. Not only that, he has an adopted child.
Anything about almost endless instance he had with Ben Shapiro when he's like, yeah, you know what, let this and allow people to have like conversations like you and me. You would like come to like my my celebration of my wedding and all that. He's like, actually,
I wouldn't come to your wedding.
That's the worst part of this entire article series is that like Ben Shapiro comes out of it smelling like a rose. He just does. I despise Ben Shapiro with a fiery passion, but he's just not.
No, sorry about that. Continue.
Yeah, Ben Shapiro, I hate him with a fiery passion, but he's just not doing any of these bad things that all these other guys are doing. He just, and that makes sense though, right? Because Ben Shapiro owns Daily Wire, right? He is not owned by anybody. He is an owner, right? He is his own media company. He already makes his own money. And so that should be telling that when Ben Shapiro sits in conversation, I mean, Jordan Peterson is an employee of Ben Shapiro, but all the same, right? Jordan Peterson's part of this network. So when Ben Shapiro sits down in this, he just shuts up. And just imagine, that's almost frightening, right? What kind of forces need to be brought to bear for Ben Shapiro to shut up?
Yeah, that says a lot right there if you get Ben Shapiro to shut up.
Yeah, Ben Shapiro's got to sit down on a set that he owns with like Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson. The two of them were just talking about how cool drugs are. And he's like, well, I never do these things. And then it's like, oh, okay. And they just go back. And so he's like, not even here. It's like, what? Ben Shapiro, what?
Can you talk about like Elon Musk and his role in all this in this article for the whole Elon Musk grass toucher?
Yes. Now, Elon Musk was the title piece of this. And that was, I admit, a little bit just to catch eyeballs. But since Elon Musk is also a guest of just about all these podcasts, I think he only has not been on Russell Brand. He's been on Lex Friedman. He's been on Joe Rogan. He has been on Jordan Peterson. He has been on Tim Pool. So Russell Brand and Pod Save America are the only two I think that he has not been on. And like I said, these guests have a lot in common, but it's not perfect overlap. But Elon Musk is big into transhumanism. Transhumanism is based. I'm actually for it, but he's in that same sphere of like, these drugs just open your mind. The thing that differentiates Jordan Peterson and Russell Brand is, well, Jordan Peterson and Russell Brand have the exact same opinion, right? The exact same opinion. There's no difference between those two. But between Jordan Peterson and Russell Brand versus these tradcasts is that tradcasts and orthos think that puts you in touch with Jesus Christ and demons. Jordan Peterson and Russell Brand say it just opens up to the vaguely spiritual. I mean, you've seen what it's like when you ask Jordan Peterson, like, hey, what are your religious beliefs? And he just becomes
he's like the hashtag spiritual, not religious motherfucker is what he is, basically. And
you
he's
just-
like, "Oh, I read Jung," and I'm like, "Cool, man. That's so. What's your religious beliefs? And I'm gonna follow you." Like,
Say Christ is Lord, right? Yeah.
oh, really?
So Elon Musk is, one of the common spokes on this wheel.
Well, okay. Is there any comments you want to have on the third article, and same for Marcel before we move on to the fourth article before we move on to the fifth one?
From legendary Jordan Peterson, I operate as though God exists is my favorite response to him being asked, does he believe God exists? And it's like, it's the type of answer that's kind of like, all right, I feel like I don't know how to respond to that. But I do think it was important to bring these two people up, just to show a bit of connections into the overarching subject matter, but also the fanaticism of the word also has a bit of gospel to it, how it's unquestioned, how people will flock to the word about the subject matter and won't question what they say, which is why things like 80% of the people won't put on ventilations are the reason why ventilation is killing COVID patients.
And you're really
despite
honest.
that the lethality, or when you're put on a ventilation system, it's on the likelihood that you're probably not going to make it. And so so it's one of those things you go, oh, okay, none of you people looked it up and you guys just took his word for it uncritically because he's not mainstream. You know what I mean? It's the same thing that happened. I think the talk down that Joe Rogan got from Bill Burr was so exceptional. He's he was a guy saying what do you think is going on? They're like, come on, I'm not gonna pretend like I know more than what I actually do. But since Joe Rogan is such a anti-culture sort of top of the echelon figure, he's seen as an authority for whoever he has on, and how many scientists he had on during the pandemic, uncritically accepting what he was saying, going, oh, okay. I mean, granted, there were time periods where he does have to push back because there's sometimes insane claims like ones from Matt Walsh where he said millions of children on HRT, and he's like, okay, I have to fact check you on that because that is too far to the point where it's so obviously wrong that someone's going to point that out. But beyond that, I think that it's extremely important to bring up these individuals due to how not only their influence, but how uncritically their influence is accepted. So we can move on to the next.
No, definitely agree. Yeah, Marcel, any closing comments before we get to the next one?
Oh, just one aspect of this article I forgot to emphasize was the introduction of a new cast member, which is Robin Carhart Harris, who is the head of the Center for Psychedelic Research at Imperial College London, and Tim Ferriss, who is, in a certain way, he's a major player in that psychedelic. He's an investor, and psychedelics is the primary thing he does, and so he's a major donor to all of these things. But he is not a right-wing thought leader in any other way. So that is why he's he only appears in this article. But in terms of moneyed interests behind getting all of the Tim Ferriss basically signs Robin Carhart Harris's checks at the Psychedelic Research Center. And Carhart Harris has been on basically all of these podcasts. And actually, it was very funny yesterday in the discussion that we had when somebody was, citing the research to me. It's oh, look at that, Leo Roseman and Robin Carhart Harris. There they are again. Because this world is very incestuous. There aren't that many researchers actually doing it, but all of their work gets a lot of shuffling around and play in all, again, of these disparate locations. Or these seemingly disparate locations.
Yeah, there's a bit of a simulacrum to some degree, where I remember a while back ago, and none of you guys have to know necessarily what I'm referring to, but it's about a harassment stream that happened to a streamer named Keffels. And while the drama with the individual in question has subsided, what I found interesting is that they were getting flooded with this person's community, and it was an article that was describing her rise to prominence through this harassment campaign that led to people coming to her support. And the harassment campaign that occurred lasted an hour and was around,
and then it got blown out of
people.
proportion, kind of similar to Gamergate
people,
stuff.
and this was prior to the person in question even knowing who Keffels was. But more importantly, what I thought was interesting is that the citation of it occurring happened in another article that was citing an article that happened not only on the website, but cited Keffels as the source of the claim of what was occurring to her. So when you looked at the other article was citing Keffels to report on Keffels in the secondary article. So it's like they're all it playing into the.
It's a roundabout is what it is.
You know, it'd be really cool would be if there was some website that existed that we could just catalog every dumb thing Keffels has ever said. Even better, we could have a central repository for all the dumb things all these lolcows have ever said, like just all of them together. So you could just, maybe even like a bi-weekly show that we could watch, so that we could just make sure that
craziness.
Yeah, you know, if anybody that way we could all just get mad at the internet together. You know, that'd be pretty funny.
All right, Marcel, go ahead. Let's get this intro knocked out for the fifth piece. Christina Angermeyer, probably butchered her name. Sorry about that. Killing an Arab by the Cure. What is your intro for this?
How best to introduce this article? So This is where now this one lays foundation for really the MK Ultra piece, where we see how when the liberals are writing about this, they take note that, you know, we were told by Timothy Leary and Terence McKenna that these drugs were supposed to turn people into left-wingers. But sorry, Sola, can you not hear me?
And he's back. I'm not quite sure what's happening on
this
side.
That must have just been like a quick spike in my internet. Sorry, did you hear my question?
Let's just ask it again, just in case.
Yeah, no, I was asking, can you give us an intro for your part 5 of the articles you wrote covering, Christine Angermeyer and...
Killing an Arab by the Cure, yes. So when left-wingers were talking about this, one of the things they talked about was how Terence McKenna and Timothy Leary and these others said, like, oh, you know, these drugs, they open up your mind, bring you closer to nature. But, you know, these right-wingers, when they go to Burning Man and take these drugs, they come out the same neoliberals that they always were. You know, what's going on there? And we see that there is research being done by MAPS and other MAPS, Imperial College London and other groups that is there to look into how you can use these drugs to change minds. And the thing that they're really into is de-radicalization. So they have studies on giving ayahuasca to Palestinian Arabs. They have studies on like de-radicalizing members of the far right. You know, people who went to Charlottesville, can giving them MDMA make them stop being Nazis. So there is, and MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, Rick Doblin, others in that sphere, you know, they are also backers of Robin Carhart Harris, backers of Leo Roseman, backers of Natalie Lila Ginsburg, backers of, Carhart Harris, Doblin, Ginsburg, and Roseman. Yeah, and Sami Awad, who took part in the Palestinian ayahuasca study. And they talk about, you know, a reduction or transformation of activism. And these guys, when they talk about this, they have a pretty solid handle of what psychedelic drugs do. They make you stupid, right? You know, they have, I'm just going to read one of these guys talking about how, like, you know, I realized I'm not really a Muslim. I'm not an Arab. You know, nobody's Arab. You know, I'm a being of light, man. And that's like the article, that's like the quote that Carhart Harris uses when he's pitching, when he's like at the top of the article. You know, a reduction or transformation of activism. And they're doing the same thing to people who are, you know, Nazis or so-called Nazis here in America. You know, so that is a mind control experiment. Like, there's nothing even to talk about here. You are trying to find some ways to give people who are, you know, political dissidents, you're giving them drugs so they will stop doing the activism that they're doing. So you are trying to rot people's minds with drugs. Right?
Yeah, you mentioned this earlier, but it literally puts holes in the brain and the gray matter, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, on that, is there anything we want to talk about for Dr. Newer, working with like MAPS and stuff like that? Because that caught me off guard when you were bringing up MAPS earlier in the previous article and seeing a connection there.
There's very little I can say off the cuff on this topic. I'll just encourage the people to read this. But there's a lot here, okay? There's a lot here. And just there were many things that I could not summarize. I could only block quote the article they came. No, but an example of a person who's on the here's an example of a person that was on the right, then they got into the sphere and then they became really stupid. Alex Jones, right? You can find clips of Alex Jones from 1997 talking about black helicopters and police surveillance, and he's making very cogent points about FLIR, forward-looking infrared, which is a real technology that actually exists. It's very simple. You just point the laser at a house or whatever, and any heat sources in the house will reflect back. And so you can image. I mean, this is just, so we just consider this as, infrared vision, right? But you can attach it to, say again?
No, I was saying it. Yeah, in an article too, you compared him earlier to him now on Joe Rogan, talking about interdimensional psychic vampires.
Yeah, he went from talking about how the police are using surplus military technology to look into people's houses, which they were, and he even says they used it at first for the war on drugs, and then they expanded the program to counter terror. And between those two, every police department in the country now just has these things. And, within a few years, the Supreme Court said, yeah, this is for the most part okay. And then he went, and then now he's talking about how the government has intelligence agents, taking ayahuasca in order to engage in diplomacy with aliens from other galaxies. A reduction or transformation in activism. I also talk about Mike Cernovich, who, I have a lot of thoughts on him even in the old days, but he owned the libs really hard, a lot. And then he got into psychedelics, and now he talks about how mass movements require animating energy. And he means energy, not we need to devote our effort, but energy in the vibration sense.
Yeah, don't forget animal spirits too.
Animal spirits. And here's where we got to Roosh V. And Roosh V's, really interesting story of converting to Christianity. I remember now, I didn't put this Roosh V thing into the first one, because in this case, I do want to attack Roosh V for his religion. So let's just read this. Roosh was a pickup artist who ran Return of Kings. And in 2012, he was getting SPLC, dossiers on him. And in 2016, he began doing pro-Trump stuff. He wrote a book, Free Speech Isn't Free. And in 2018, his sister died, natural causes. In October 2018, he was debanked. Because that's a thing that happens in America. Banks decide that they don't want to do business with you, and then you just can't transact. You just can't have your website. You just can't do anything. So in December of 2018, he went to Poland for a 6-week sex party, presumably like Andrew Tate, but instead of Romania, Poland. Poland, Romania, close friends. And he says at the end of the 6-week visit, all that sex wasn't doing it for him. He asked God to give him guidance. And then this British sexpat that he had met in 2014, he came across him in terms of meeting him, not came across him sexually. He's like, hey, can you let me try magic mushrooms? And then he did a heroic dose of magic mushrooms. And then in March 2019, so this happened in Christmas, and then now in March, he returned to the Armenian Apostolic Church. And then in May 2021, he got baptized Ortho. And he's totally depoliticized. He's like, I'm not in the red pill. I'm on the God pill. Life isn't about doing pickup artist stuff. It's not about anti-feminism. It's not about free speech. It's about asking him for help and performing his will in a way that embraces good. So Roosh has become depoliticized, a reduction or transformation of his activism. Right, that is what will happen to you when you get into this world of drugs. You go from being, again, I wasn't a Roosh V fan in the old days. I never really read his website. I'm not saying this as a moral defense of myself. If you read Return of Kings, it does something for you, good. But Return of Kings did good things for people, I imagine. Alex Jones's information was highly informative back in those days. I mean, a lot of Radley Balco's Rise of the Warrior Cop had to catch up with Alex Jones. And then when it comes to Mike Cernovich, I mean, listen, like I said, he owned the libs a lot, right? But all three of them have gotten into this world and they've just become stupid and useless.
And what would you say really quick on his name's Murphy, Connor Murphy, how he ascended down, he's claiming he's God and everything like that. What would you say that's all for? Another,
Cerno. Yeah, that's Cerno talking about Connor Murphy. He's just doing the same bit about being in the right liturgical framework and using Christianity as your scuba suit. That's a perfect example of somebody who says, as long as you are properly secure, you say your blessings to the emperor, then you can enter into the warp. You get into a private world of total nonsense. And all these, Alex Jones is deplatformed, but these other people, they have platforms now. Roosh was banned from everything, and now he's on Twitter. He's on everything. Back when you were doing pickup artist stuff, that was, we can't have that. That's hateful. Oh, what are you doing now? Psychedelic Christianity? Okay, welcome back. You are no longer a dissident. You are no longer a threat. Welcome back.
It's almost like getting sterilized, if you will. Kind of like you take out the edge off of someone, and you're like, all right, you're no longer something we got to worry about.
Yes, actually, one of the let me find the quote. There's a guy, Dr. Sausa Nur-Adin, who was responding to that Israeli-Palestinian ayahuasca bowl, and he said, I suggest, on the basis of my analysis, that this trial risks functioning as an exercise in psychedelic lobotomy. Like, you need to trust your normal instincts, right? Now, too good. Sausa Nur-Adin is just responding. Like, Sausa just read this paper, looked at it, and said, hold on a second, and he just acknowledged the obvious of what is there. And this is a problem in our sphere, and this will come when we get to the next article, and so we're kind of running against the clock. A lot of, in our space, in our orbit, they take advantage of your fear of like missing out, your fear that like, well, if I don't go along with whatever crazy thing this right-wing thought leader is doing, then I'm back out in the cold, listening to my libtard family members, and I won't be able to talk about cool stuff anymore. So I guess if he's talking about it, I guess I'll go like, no, don't go along with it. Look at what's happening and just say, listen, that's dumb, that's stupid. And again, granted, maybe you will lose your opportunity, that you will be banned, but that should cause you to think, right? Like, the only way that your strong stance will get you in trouble is not because your friends will exclude you. It's because, like, when you start speaking too loudly, all of these free thinkers will, Twitter will be like, whoa, and then you'll be throttled, you'll be deplatformed or whatever. It's like, sorry, we only allow stupid right-wingers on our platform. We only allow, like, just gibbering morons who do drugs and encourage our audience to do drugs. And I see that you want to do cool right-wing stuff without saddling it down with, like, useless nonsense. So I'm sorry, that's just not allowed on this platform.
No, definitely. Is there any last comments you want to have on this before we move on to the final one? Because, sorry about that if we're in a rush, but we are against the clock right now. No, and I feel like the last one's best.
Yeah, the last one, it's just, we really saved the best for last here. Yes. So this one is on CIA Project MKUltra. So now this one is just looking into the past and looking at how does the past inform the present. And one thing that the first thing is part of MKUltra, just forgetting everything else, part of MKUltra was that the CIA, in doing this research, like outsourced it to like every university in the country by creating cutout organizations doing grants, right? Like, the interest in LSD studies that was happening in the 60s and 70s was not an organic phenomenon. The CIA was using proxy organizations to outsource some of the research they wanted done. All right. So if we see, a bunch of academics who are researching this very strange topic, it's like, this is top down, right? Somebody's writing these grants. Who's interested in these grants? In some cases, we know it's Tim Ferriss, right? But in other cases, who else? So that's one thing you should know straight out of the gate. But yeah, so MKUltra, Sirhan, and Adam Waffen. MKUltra is a very severely misunderstood program. Which doesn't think people even understand it at all. They have this sort of brain dead take where they say like, oh, they tried to make mind control, but all they made is LSD. And this is, it's call and response. Everybody thinks this. Everybody needs to ask yourself, if that's true, why did everybody involved get medals and promotions? How can that be? Sidney Gottlieb got to retire 15 years early, and he had a plaque on the wall, and the plaque on the wall wouldn't even say what he did. He literally had a plaque on the wall in Langley, and it's like to Sidney Gottlieb, and there's like an empty fucking space on what his profession was. You think because that didn't work? You think they're just ashamed? It's like, better get him out of here. We're just so embarrassed. No, okay. The program. MKUltra was an outgrowth. So the CIA first had Operation Bluebird, which was an interrogation program, then Artichoke, which was a torture and a more comprehensive torture and interrogation program. And then MKUltra was there to study if drugs could be used to leave little souvenirs. What if we got you high, interrogated you, and gave you orders, and then after you sobered up, you would continue to believe it? Well, that must prove it's true. They showed that LSD could be used in the right circumstances as an interrogation drug. These people tested it out on each other. It was a really funny bit. They were testing it out on soldiers. Some were just recreational experimenting, but it worked to interrogate. And there's a great book on this called Poisoner in Chief about Sidney Gottlieb. Sidney Gottlieb was doing just about every chemical program the CIA had. He was working on poisons. He was working on chemical defoliants. But MKUltra was like his baby. He absorbed everything into it.
I think it's worth noting at this point in the conversation when people try to dismiss MKUltra as just being LSD. It was worth I think it was very significant that in prior articles you mentioned how people who have gone on a trip of LSD or other psychedelics, how their perception of things have been drastically altered to some degree. Or at least how they like explain how reality works to some degree. Like I think people really, at the very least, downplay what LSD is and what type of effect it can have on people. They think of it as just like a brief, change in like perception, and then you just come down. Some people like Giga, I believe his name was, not the anime man, but he was a YouTuber who constantly had the Folakui picture for some time. I think too much of that sort of drug like led him to like try to create like this revolutionary con in which he wanted like enlightened thinkers, and not realizing like his influence as a YouTuber, he kind of just really went off the deep end. But I just, all this to say, I think people really downplay how impactful LSD can be to the mind. So to just simply call it LSD really doesn't speak significantly to how it can impact one's like processes.
Yeah, some of these people, like Morse Allen, who was director of the Bluebird program, which was reorganized into Artichoke under Gottlieb. I mean, he was taking hypnotism courses and using it to fuck his secretaries. Well, hypnosis isn't real. Oh, well, doesn't matter. You know, still beat though.
What was it? The CIA is your best friend. The agent is your best friend.
Yeah. So somebody was saying, just because you believe, like the fact that you believe afterwards that what you saw on the drugs is real means that it is real. It's like, no, because you can take drugs and believe the CIA agent is your best friend. Anybody who's listening to this, if you don't believe in MK Ultra, if you think it's not real, things a waste of money, I'm sorry, you are like really wrong. You're really wrong, and you should read my article, and you will see this was a torture and interrogation program bolstered with drugs to try to leave some souvenirs, in the subject, and it worked. There's a reason they went with it. It showed immediate promise when they tested a variety of drugs. LSD did very well. The main problem they had was that some people, especially in the early days, some people, you take LSD and you think that your interrogator is a giant. Some people, you take LSD and you think you're a giant, right? That was like the primary obstacle for the TNI stuff, right? It was just like making sure that the hallucination you have is one that makes you do what the interrogator says. But as a truth serum, it totally worked.
Okay, and because we're running a bit on time, is there any last things you want to say about this article? And then we could talk about where we could find you on social media and everything.
Sure. So, one thing I would say is anybody who thinks that LSD is not, or for some reason cannot be, a mind control drug. The example they talk, John Lennon said, they tried to turn us into Stepford wife Republicans or whatever, and I'm still a libtard, so it didn't work. Well, yeah, if you are a libtard and you take drugs with your libtard friends, exchanging libtard platitudes with each other, you're not going to come out of that voting for Ronald Reagan. But the question is this: if you think LSD is not a mind control drug, then I don't actually invite you to do this because it would be illegal. But how would you feel if we just sat in a room together where you took LSD and I didn't, and I just started to try to convince you of my views? If you're and nobody would ever consent to that, right? It's just the very idea. It's like, yeah, I would totally be fine, since I'm just so confident that LSD is not a mind control drug. I will sit in a room with a sober person who does not share my views, who is doing his ever best to isolate me and persuade me to have his views. No, hell no, no one would.
No, not really.
And next, so there's two other sections in this article that are far, within this last MK Ultra article. I show two cases in which it is like abundantly that MK Ultra was at play. The fingerprints of it were there. The combination of hypnosis, torture, and psychedelic drugs to make people commit serious crimes. In one case, you have a guy who shot somebody. He shot somebody and missed. He shot somebody, he didn't even hit the guy, right? Somebody else actually did the final bullet pull. But it is abundantly clear that this person was not in control of himself. And, this was all at trial. They were quoting his diary, saying the most insane, deranged things. And the prosecutor said it's free verse poetry. No, these are the writings, not even of somebody who is crazy. These are the writings of somebody who has been traumatized. And then the second example of MK Ultra use is a case of a guy named Joshua Caleb Suter, who ran a group called Atomwaffen, which was like it's a lot of things. Let's just say it's a neo-Nazi, Satanist, pedophile, terroristic death cult. And there are probably other adjectives that I'm missing out on. Who he basically took over, he ran Order of Nine Angles, then he took over a group called Atomwaffen, and he got them all, or he got them promoting drugs when they weren't promoting drugs before. And he was recruiting 13, 14, 15-year-olds, getting them high, basically pimping them out to other terrorist groups like the Base, like Combat 18, some others. And they some of their members were doing satanic chants and like stabbing Muslims to death, and were just so engrossed in it that when the police came to try to stop them, these guys were desperately trying to decapitate these people in front of their mosques. You had people that were like vandalizing synagogues, and as soon as the cops arrested them, they're like, I want to kill black people, I want to be a suicide bomber, just ranting and raving about all the crimes they want to commit. And this guy is writing, Joshua Caleb Suter was writing letters to other Satanist groups about like bringing out people's sinister potential through a combination of like sex, satanic ritual abuse, and psychedelic drugs. And then he even says, let me make sure I find it. In the latter stages, it becomes more overt, and at that point, it is too late for them to change. They become so alienated from humanity that, well, haha, if they try to go back, they will still cause so much disruption. Saturn descends. This is good for now. In blood, BLKBTOB. Okay, and this guy, spoiler, was an FBI informant. Did Satan come to this man in a dream and teach him how you can use psychedelic drugs to get like mentally ill people and like teenagers and turn them into like terrorists and murderers and rapists? Did Satan teach you that? No, I don't think so. I think an agent.
I mean, even in terms of the intensity of the drug, I think it's worth noting that typically on a trip, they highly advise you having like a caretaker or somebody around you that like you can trust to be around you. Mm-hmm. And even
you said earlier, the FBI agent's your best friend, or CIA agent is your best buddy.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I'm not gonna be. The thing I was gonna think is very important to speak about this is even some cults to some degree. You can see the implementation, or at the very least usage of psychedelics to really like break down like whether or not that be their home body or the ability to have connections with the outside world and the perception of the outside world and what that means to perceive it. So I really enjoyed, I thought, again, to reiterate, I thought it was very important to show how these type of drugs, definitely people who are on these drugs or are advising people to be on these drugs are talking about something that either one doesn't have much basis, such as the idea of like transcendent science, or the people who try to perceive like there being some sort of ultimatum, like you either believe in like these alternative realities that exist around us, or you believe that like human beings' limitations are like somewhere within like the prehistoric history. Like that whole argument against Russell Brand was very excellent about that whole false dichotomy that was brought about. But yeah, I thought it was very interesting about like how throughout all these articles it shows how much the incessant usage of psychedelics not only affects the mind, but to bring forth the significance of psychedelics and to really evaluate MK Ultra, and then to and ensures that it's not simply dismissed as just it's not just simply dismissed as LSD. It brings, if anything, the importance of like, hey, this is no joke of a drug.
Yes,
definitely. Marcel, is there, for the audience, any way we can find you on social media? What platforms are you on? Where can we find and read these articles?
So you can find this article, and I'm assuming you'll put it in the show notes. My Substack is mgautreau.substack.com. My personal website, where you can find my more academic work, is just mgautreau.com. So mgautreau.com is my main website. mgautreau.substack is my Substack. But if you want to, contact me most easily, you can find me on Twitter at Anarchy in Black, all one word, obviously. ANARCHYINBLACK. BLACK. Anarchy in Black. One word. That's my Twitter @.
Thank you so much again for being on Rec Room Radio. It's amazing and phenomenal to have guests like you on, and we hope to see you.
Happy to be here to talk about this Sola anytime.
Yes, and that should be all from us. Hazy, any last closing things you want to say before we close up?
Thank you, Marcel, for bringing your A game for this episode. I think we spoke extensively about each one of these articles to the point where it entices, but also greatly informs people about the magnitude of what you did thorough research about. And I respect your keen eye to look into these subject matters and delve into them. But that's everything for me on my end. This has been another episode of Rec Room Radio, and you've seen us all in HD.
What's up, Marcel?
I just want to toss out 2 book recommendations besides my article series. The books you should read, I mentioned, were Reclaiming the American Right, to see the history of neoconservatism and former Trotskyists, former far left activists becoming Republican thought leaders. I mentioned Poisoner in Chief, which is the book about the life of Sidney Gottlieb and the MK Ultra program. And I mentioned Opioids for the Masses on the big pharma push to get people doing oxycodone. It's not really psychedelic drugs, but it factors into the Republicans, the Mercer Foundation, and that kind of thing.
Yes, thank you again for the book recommendation. And for people who don't know, Marcel is a very intelligent man. He has tons of other books as well. We could get on a different topic. But I know you got to go soon, so this has been Rec Room Radio signing out. You all heard us here. Thank you again for our guests, and we hope to see you again in the future. Bye.